Well, it's 4:30 in Nagoya, and I wish you welcome to the Asian Conference on Cultural Studies and the Asian Conference on Asian Studies, and to this special panel we have on design and democracy. And this panel will be for an hour and a half. It will be moderated by me, and it will be for a 90-minute period and sponsored by the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation in Japan. We're very, very happy that we've been able to come up with this technological solution to be able to reach you, because when we first thought about doing this panel, it was to be done in the context of a live conference in Tokyo. And this conference was to have been in the Toshi Center in Tokyo, Japan. And we were hoping to have Bruce Brown from the Royal College of Art come over and to have the other panelists there as well. So my name's Joseph Haldane, and I'm the chairman of IAFOR. And I'd like to begin by thanking the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation for their kind support of this particular panel. So the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation was a foundation that was founded post-war and is named for Germany's first post-war chancellor. And I'm going to read here, one of the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation's missions is to promote the social and political development infrastructure and countries and regions in which they work. And so that's very important work, and it aligns with our mission here at IAFOR. So we're very happy to have them support this panel. Now, when we were first in discussions for doing a panel on design and democracy, this was in sort of December, January time, and this was before the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's obviously something that design and democracy is an evergreen topic. And within the context of the COVID pandemic, it certainly adds another lens through which we can look at these questions of design and democracy. So I'm sure that we'll be referring to that throughout. The panel overview you can look at on the websites of the Asian Conference on Cultural Studies or the Asian Conference on Asian Studies. And if you are joining us through either the membership page or through Facebook, I will have links posted there so you can look at the overview. But what we're going to do is essentially look at these two concepts of design and democracy. And of course, we're going to ask each of our panelists to address this very, very wide topic from a variety of perspectives. So IAFOR is an organization which is committed to interdisciplinarity and to the provision of interdisciplinary platforms. We've just had a panel which go live, which has presented different perspectives on the COVID pandemic from different countries within Asia and Southeast Asia. And one of the very interesting things there is that we've had different not just different reactions within countries, but different policy responses within countries, depending on their structures, their backgrounds, and their systems of governance. And we've also seen some of the wider systems of supranational governance, such as the European Union, such as ASEAN, and such as the United Nations and bodies, notably the World Health Organization, find different ways of trying to cope with the COVID pandemic, and also to try and find ways of cooperation. And I think this is something worth underlining, that this COVID pandemic is one of the big problems that is transnational. It's a problem that certainly has crossed borders from its origins in China to spread to different countries throughout the world. And much like climate change, it's one of these sort of big issues that if you have a polluter in one area or upstream, then downstream, if that's a different country, then it's going to impact that. So I think what we're certainly seeing is this great historical moment. Of course, how great or how important remains to be seen. And but really, where we're seeing a lot of the global order being tested in some way. And a lot of these structures are structures that have been in place since 1648, the sort of the Westphalian systems and structures, and then Enlightenment sort of structures around what is democracy. And of course, I accept the term democracy to be very loaded, and all sorts of very undemocratic things have been done in the name of democracy, but it still remains an incredibly important heuristic in its in that it guarantees or seeks to guarantee freedoms. Now, design, and this will be unpacked by some by our panelists, but design essentially concerns itself with anything artificial, from product design right through to designs of systems and how we interact with those designs. And one of the constants is the technologies which have forced themselves in between these concepts of design and democracy. And I think we're going to be talking about some of those. So within the context of both Asian studies and cultural studies, I think this should be an interdisciplinary panel that really is and does provoke some interest. So what we're going to do in this panel is we're going to give, and there's 3 panelists, and then myself as the moderator, and we're going to give each panelist about 5 minutes to come at this question of design and democracy from different perspectives. The first panelist is Bruce Brown from the Royal College of Art in the UK, who's a designer and has been university administrator and on the board of several different higher education research framework councils. And he's somebody who's also the editor of an MIT journal on research, design and research. We have Nagayuki Saito from the International Professional University of Technology, Japan, who works in technology and policy. He's worked for a number of different bodies, including UN bodies. And he's somebody who serves as a senior advisor to the Line Corporation. He's just popped up on the screen there. I don't think he is in Paris, but
yeah.
or he may have taken a virtual trip to Paris. And then we also have Ryuji Yamazaki-Skov of Osaka University in Japan, who works with the world famous roboticist Ishiguro, and he's somebody who works notably on the ethics of AI. So we're coming at this from a number of different perspectives. So I think it's going to be a very exciting sort of discussion, and I will have these 3 different presentations of 5 minutes each. Then we'll have the panelists respond to each other and to what each other have said. And then we'll look at some different questions that we have prepared and in the overview, notably which refer to questions of the attention economy and responsible design. And then we'll hopefully open it up to the floor in the final 20 or 30 minutes for some input and feedback. So to kick us off, we go over to Professor Bruce Brown, who's in the UK. Good morning, Bruce. Can you hear me?
I can, Joe. Hello.
Very good.
Hello to everybody.
And it's over to you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And welcome to everybody who's out there listening, wherever you are. Perhaps I'll say a few broad words about these 2 terms, design and democracy, to try and frame the discussion. First of all, in terms of design, there are 2 things that are important. There are things that are visible and things that are invisible. Now, by this, I mean that design can be about the tangible things around us, the design of a teapot, the design of a kettle, the design of a building, and so on. There are things that are invisible. And design can be concerned with things like systems, small systems or big international systems, or it can be concerned with the things that are inside our minds and our heads, the memories we carry with us. We tend to think that design is about the material world, and that we interpret in the way we want to interpret it. Now, design grew up after the First and Second World Wars to help feed a capitalist system of production, which is economic growth is based on just getting bigger all the time. So design tooled up to feed the economies with more and more products, which had to be user-friendly and they had to be desirable to consumers. So the consumer boom began to emerge in the 20th century. But one of the things that came along with this was the idea of keeping nations at peace after the experience of the First and Second World Wars. And particularly in America, one of the things that became to be apparent was that consumer products were a way of satisfying people, for satiating their desires and wishes, and therefore taking the rise of some of the bigger political issues that we need to deal with. So what then emerged was a set of technological developments through design in terms of how we communicate with each other. And these moved from television, radio, and print, which all essentially are one-directional mediums. It allows one person to dominate or transmit to the views of multitudes, a single ideology or a single view of the world. What happened with smartphones and computers was this process was broken down and it became interactive and networks were built so that every person could talk to every other person. So this system of political stability based on design has begun to break down. And one of the questions now is, how do you retain stability in a system, in a democratic system where people have choice, without moving towards any ideologies that seem to be totalitarian or otherwise? Now, one of the things that interests me about freedom to vote and freedom to express an opinion is that in this environment, one of the strategies that has emerged, and always was there actually, to try and bring people together and to bring coherence to a system, is the idea of creating barbarians. That is, outside your tribe, there are people who are unclean, unhealthy, or who have aggressive feelings towards you. And these people are the other. And this creates a kind of homogenous sense within a group. And these others might be Muslims, they may be Mexicans, they may be Scots, they may be English, they may be Welsh, there may be all sorts of people, but one way or another, the need to create barbarians seems to be part of this situation. Now, one of the things I would argue is that whereas design, linking into this, was dealing with consumer products, material things, design has now moved to intangible things, invisible things, the systems that we see around us and operate us and shape our views. And it deals with the memories that all of us carry and how we receive and store those memories. Therefore, design has a powerful influence upon the way in which we perceive the world, how we see it, and how we choose to exercise our choice. So at the moment, there is a struggle going on between these two dichotomies of design and democracy. And it is a power struggle. It is a power struggle to see who remains in control of systems and what are the tools that they can use to maintain that control. So thanks, Joe.
That point of a power struggle between design and democracy reflects a wider power struggle between different types of government and different types of governance and ideologies. So it's clearly an interesting way to frame that, a historical way to frame that, and I'm sure we'll come round back to that. I'd like to go to the second presenter today, who's Nagayuki Saito of the International Professional University of Technology in Tokyo. Nagayuki, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear your voice clearly.
Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Nagayuki Saito. Before my presentation, may I introduce myself? Currently, I am a professor at the International Professional University of Technology in Tokyo. In parallel with this professorship, I am also a senior researcher at the Public Policy Office of Line Corporation and the Line Mirai Foundation. Also from 2012, I would like to, I worked at the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and was in the position of policy analyst. At the time of OECD researcher, I was involved in the international policy on the protection of children who use the internet from the perspective of international information and communication policy, especially privacy, protection, and security policy. Even now, I am a member of the OECD expert group under the Working Party on Security and Privacy in the Digital Economy, WPSPDE, and contribute to the revision work of recommendation on the protection of children online. Now toward the theme of this panel, design and democracy. My specialty is media policy. Yes, my research field is policy research on media usage environment. So today, panel discussion theme, design and democracy is close to me. My research topics have focused on policy direction and regulatory measure for appropriate media, especially for the standpoint of user protection and consumer protection. And my main research topics is policy development and evaluation to protect children who use the internet. The use of the internet bringing us many benefits, but also some risks of encountering various disadvantages. For example, various risks such as fake news, distorting people's judgment and action, fraud over the internet, personal information linkage, privacy infringement, and copyright infringement, information linkage, cyber attack, etc. are surrounded us. These risks can harm children as well as adults. But not only that, but there is also the risk of children failing more than adults. For example, miscommunication with friends online during cyber sexting, slander, etc. Particular attention should be paid to the fact that children are inexperienced, tend to believe in others because they are purely emotional, have inadequate emotional control, and have no claim judgment ability. Therefore, it is said that the internet risk is higher than adults. And then to protect children who use the internet, there are two major policy directions. The first is a regulatory policy for business that provide internet services. And the second is a policy to raise awareness of children who use the internet. Specific example for regulatory policy for business players in Japan include the Personal Information Protection Law requires companies to take measures to protect personal information. The Provider Reliability Limitation Law allows companies to take illegal and harmful information. And the Internet Usage Environment Improvement Act that requires companies to provide children's mobile phone with filtering to block illegal and harmful information. On the other hand, in the awareness raising policy for children who use the Internet Usage Environment Improvement Act explained above aim to raise awareness of safe use of the internet by children and provide enlightenment in education to improve their internet literacy. The OECD recommendation on the protection of children online mentioned at the beginning of my presentation stipulate that evidence-based policies should be adopted as an international guideline for the protection of children. The reason why the evidence-based policy is important in the protection of children online is that if the ability children to the risk of the internet is visible, the strength of protection of children should be set appropriately. In addition, for companies that provide internet services, it is possible to regulate business activities based on the ability of children to prevent internet risks. After all, for the standpoint of children as well as from the company's point of view, it is better to keep regulation to a minimum. Because from a children's standpoint, minimal regulation help to maximize their freedom to use the internet. From a corporate standpoint, minimal regulation allows maximum freedom of corporate activities. For these reasons, the policy required by society is the minimum necessary intervention. And it is necessary to constantly evaluate whether or not the intervention of moderate strength has been implemented. In this way, I believe that it is necessary to have a design that allows for policy intervention to always maintain a balance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nagayuki, and for that overview. And we're going to now immediately go to the third and final panelist, Ryuji. Going over to you, and if you can start your presentation now, please.
Hello, everybody. Joe, thank you very much for your introduction. Well, I've been working with Professor Ishiguro and doing studies with some robots in some fields, like care facility for older adults. But first of all, we are communicating with the internet now, and today's topic is related to it, especially the excess of information. It's conveyed so much today on the internet, and it's been brought in so many problems today. Even today, we heard some news from somewhere. But anyway, some scholars, authors, for example, emphasize that it is anonymity of the internet that allows, that alters the conditions for moral agency. Today, I want to talk a bit more about ethical issue pertaining to the internet uses or social media. And in addition, robotic media. It is even to the extent that our moral intuitions in real life may become affected, as, for example, Sherry Tarko describes. Frequently, the ethically problematic aspects of internet communication are attributed to the lack of physical contact, namely, the telecommunication is disembodied. With the current telecommunication technologies, as in phone conversation and social media, SNS text messaging, we may be having difficulty in feeling the presence of interlocutor, especially in such a case when we attack others from a safe zone without anybody contacts. But today, there are recent attempts to add elements of embodied communication into the internet, for example, by teleoperated robots that can work as communication media while moving its head and hugging. You can see an example with this picture. It's called Telenoid, which was developed by Professor Ishiguro. It's a teleoperated android robot. With its minimalistic design, it is modeled to resemble a genderless and ageless human, perceivable as anybody. If you are familiar with philosophy as my background, for example, for Levinas, it may remind you of some concept of the others, because we face somebody with this kind of a new design of a robot. In face-to-face or in picture, we see others, of course, but we see some other features like gender and age, and it could be, how to say, give some biases in communication. However, this kind of a robot has some neutral appearance, and it may provide some kind of pure communication and facing us and giving us some feeling of others. But anyway, this was just an example, and we've been conducting some experiments with the robot at the care facility, at care settings like care facility for older adults. Studies indicated that even though older adults with dementia, for example, sometimes show dementia symptoms, so-called BPSD, such as agitation and aggressiveness, the patients would change their behavior, becoming open and prosocial through robotic mediation. Further, by using suitable conversational topics, participants' reactions could be extracted more easily. Studies indicated that there is a potential for leading older adults in a specific direction in a positive way, though. With further development of robotic persuasive technology, we can expect older adults' subjectivity to be led by such technology in daily activities. We can further consider ethical issues. As an advantage, a robot can effectively collect and convey personal information with instance recall and storage, and has the ability to adjust its expression, voice, and gender, while continuously acting as an active listener, enabling it to incorporate interactive techniques necessary for psychological manipulation that seem to convince through anthropomorphism. By making robots persuasive, users may have difficulty controlling their own information flow by themselves. Ethical concerns are raised when personal data are dealt with, but this goes, I believe, further than privacy implications. The ethical implication is that robotic media as persuasive technology poses a risk of undermining human autonomy. The notion of autonomy is problematic in relation to technology. What kind of freedom can older adults or all of us have while being led by technology? Technology that interfere with freedom do not simply externally constrain our actions, but also involve themselves internally in our intentions. This implies another type, namely relational freedom, as coined by a philosopher, Peter Verbeek, that shapes our subjectivity while interacting with technology, allowing us to adjust the influence of technology accordingly. Older adults have a certain relational freedom in determining how their will and behaviors are being changed while receiving the influence of media technology. As suggested by him, in the freedom as an alternative to the notion of autonomy, we need to acknowledge and accept that any form of mediation must be critically examined when it dominates users without a way to modify its impact on us. There are approaches to respecting the user's own will, from, for example, Belmont Report and research ethics. Voluntariness is a key component of informed consent. And it protects against coercion or unjustifiable pressure. So other than the explanatory approach, which I would say simply follow the user's will, we can propose and consider further to adopt a feedback approach to change the user's will by convincing them of greater advantages when providing them information. Letting persuasive technology help us, instead of seeing it as a threat, pessimistically, to autonomy or relational freedom, can in some cases support our capacity for self-government, enhancing our freedom under the influence of technology. To enhance users' freedom and thus allow them to adjust the influence technology, we can develop, for example, research ethics to balance the risk and benefits of research activities related to the individual, while also assuming the good of society sometimes requires trade-offs. As for data access and review, one might accidentally give out information that in retrospect could be deemed unwanted. Therefore, the subjects or the assigned surrogates need the freedom to review and amend personal records. There are therapeutic robot design options that give individuals the ability to understand and manage their information portfolio. It is important to both maximize the user's benefit and enable researchers to access resources such as data sharing based on informed consent. These capabilities should be incorporated in the design and development of therapeutic robots by making use of robotic modalities. For instance, vocal systems, not only text, and in daily uses, explanatory and feedback approaches along with media design need to be further investigated, I believe, in parallel with conditions and methods for deploying persuasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Ryuji. And I'm just going to pick up then on the sort of the three presentations and the things that I got from those three presentations there before we get into a discussion. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting in what Bruce was saying, and that reflected something in the introduction, was the how to maintain stability without sort of drifting into totalitarianism. And I think one of the things we've sort of seen at the moment is this power struggle, and also something of a I call it the COVID Olympics, whereby the different sort of representative countries are coming forward with these different statistics as to how well they're doing in this sort of like national and international race, sort of in terms of numbers of tests versus numbers of not tested versus deaths and whatnot. And these, what's interesting is these sort of COVID Olympics, if you will, are like a stand-in for the real Olympics, because we're not having them in Tokyo this year, but also they're like stand-ins for sort of political systems. So when you see, oh, this democracy is doing particularly well because it's able to do this, whereas this authoritarian state is able to do particularly well because it's able to do this. It's like it's showing off its sort of systems of governance or its systems of being able to do different things. And that, I think, gives us quite an interesting note. In the beginning, I referenced the Westphalian system, which is sort of dominated the system of nation states, that's sort of come to dominate certainly the conversations around what constitutes sovereignty and what doesn't. And this made me think of course, Hobbes, who was writing at about the same time, in terms of the coming out of the state of nature, and the things that you're giving up when you're coming out of the state of nature are you're giving up things in order to be able to move towards what is security and move towards a guaranteeing of certain freedoms. You might be giving up certain freedoms in order to move towards a situation where you have greater security. And I think one of the things we've seen recently, certainly, is the situation of lockdowns in certainly in most countries, and in most democracies where such lockdowns would probably have been inconceivable something like 6 months ago, that a government and a system is enabled to impose what is in effect a very authoritarian measure, and in some cases put people under sort of what's tantamount to house arrest. It might or might not be for their own good, but that's an interesting question of governance. Nagayuki was talking about privacy and security, and of course one of the areas where there is to a large extent still a state of nature in one form of the internet, and that's the to put it crudely, an internet that's not subject or under the Chinese Great Firewall. That is an internet which where there's more in the way of a sort of a freedom. So children, for example, as you pointed out, can go on the internet and they can look up pretty much anything. And it's of course wonderfully designed to be very intuitive. We have Google to thank for that. Google, which started as an academic search system, and by which we can very, very easily navigate the internet, and children can do so. And of course, one of the things we're mindful of is children who are engaging in things that perhaps they shouldn't be engaging in as children, or that they might fall victims to some of the nastier sides of the internet, including the reference to sort of the dark web. I thought it was interesting as well because within the past 10 to 20 years, there's certainly been a big increase in concepts relating to children's rights and the rights of children to be able to, as they develop intellectually and physically, that they're able to sort of make their own judgments and their own decisions progressively. But there's also then the counter case of the infantilization. That is on the other side of if we're seeking to protect, isn't that the same thing as more authoritarian regimes? And isn't that the underpinning that more authoritarian regimes would use for such measures that might be deemed coercive? Then in Ryuji's presentation, he again picked up on the questions of internet problems, and also something that I thought was interesting in terms of moral agency, and that is and that references Bruce's point in terms of the historical development of these media, that before they were sort of, it was transmitting, it was broadcasting, it was one way, whereas now we've got this situation where people can engage online, and if they engage anonymously, then we've seen that they can engage in behaviors that they wouldn't otherwise engage in if they weren't anonymous. And so I thought that was quite interesting, because a lot of the technologies that you're working with are about the embodiment or the re-embodiment, if you will, of technology through robots. And part of the what you showed there, the telenoid, I thought was interesting, because that's a re-embodiment, but while re-embodying, it's taking away gender, it's taking away race, and it's taking away basically the different features. And I've been explained by one of your colleagues that this is to allow the projection onto that sort of otherwise featureless object yourself, so that if you're holding and engaging with the telenoid, but it has the voice of a loved one, that you can essentially project onto this. It's a pretty interesting technology. So there's questions of trade-offs then between the freedom and the security, and then there's I think what we're living through is probably a great example of these trade-offs, including what we're doing at the moment in engaging online through these online technologies. So I've briefly sort of done a wrap up, and we've got some really diverse points, and I'm going to go back to Bruce to see if you'd like to pick up on any of those in particular and run with any of them.
Well, let me just make one further comment about design. If you want a definition of design in the 21st century, it is the actions people take to change an existing situation into a preferred and better situation. Now, everybody is a designer in that sense. The difficulty is we always assume that a better situation is a good situation and that people's intentions are always honorable. I only have to remind you that the Holocaust was a designed process. And it was exercised in the belief that this was about racial purification. So design has two sides to it. It's incredibly powerful in getting into the psyche and the collective memories of people, but it can be used for good and it can be used for evil. And I'm concerned at the moment how new technologies are allowing this power to seep into the minds and the views of people.
I'll go to Nagayuki. Are there any things in particular from the other speakers that that you brought up that you're interested in picking up?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I think policy making is important that to balance the society and policy aim goal to adjust the society is important, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So picking up on the policy, and Ryuji, would you like to respond?
Well, thank you. It was very interesting to hear both talks, and I have lots of questions, but my interest was in first, Bruce described the definition of design, and it includes action. And as I mentioned, persuasive technologies, it, how to say, the design of such technology affects human behavior, also human mind as well. So I just wonder what Bruce would think about such kind of influence of technology on the human mind, not only the appearance of human behavior, but also human mindset.
Well, the question I've just been asked would have related to the third point I was going to make in response to what you've just said. I mean, the point about this is that we are all susceptible as adults to the messages we're bombarded with, and they're not often clear messages, and there's a lot of noise in the system. And I do believe that technology and design are powerful, but they're neither good nor bad. It depends how they're used, and it depends on the intentions of the people using technology and using the design. And together, they're a powerful combination. And I would categorize three sorts of intentions. One is information, the second is persuasion, and the third is coercion. Now we start with information, and everybody believes that when we receive information through the internet or any other source, what we have is uncorrupted data. What we are being told is the truth. The difficulty with that is that all data is filtered and all data is weighted. There is nothing so difficult these days as knowing who to trust in terms of the data we're receiving. If I go to the other end of the scale, to coercion, coercion uses the innocence, the seeming innocence of data to tell lies. And coercion will often use force to subjugate a population or the minds of groups of people in order to subscribe to an ideology. Somewhere in the middle of this is persuasion. Now, persuasion has a bad name because it believes it is used in the hands of people who do not have good intentions. But actually, the only way we subscribe to all the things we do in a community is by being persuaded to exercise our free will in a particular direction. And that's a difficult balance to get right. So I would say in answer to the question that we're living in a very different and difficult environment, which is polarized. On the one hand, we have individuals and the needs of an individual, their freedoms, their feelings, their mindsets, and so on. And on the other side of this spectrum, we have community. And the communities have to have coherence and be held together. But they're so far apart now because of new technologies, which has really created a cellular culture, which everybody can live in their own little bubble and survive in their own little bubble, that the question of coherence and democracy and how we keep a community together has become very difficult. So in answer to the specific question, I think in this struggle, I do think people's minds can be changed, affected by the things that we're bombarded with. I think at the moment there is no single message. We're bombarded by so much information. The point is to confuse us. Therefore, nobody can make a decision. And the only decisions that are made are those by the people in authority and power. So I agree with what's been said, and I'll try to give a longer explanation for why I agree.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'd like to pick up on that by inserting a question here, and this is from Peter Perez. And this is, it can be argued that policymakers are also designers. Bruce, you've forwarded that we are all in fact designers. Yeah. But as technology becomes more integrated into our daily lives, what do you think about policymakers' attempts to regulate technology? Do you think there's too much intervention or too little? So Nagayuki, you were talking about intervention in terms of regulating the internet. So do you think there's too much intervention at the moment or too little?
Yes, such a topics exactly. It is need to make the balance intervention to policy intervention. The criteria for the decision whether or not the intervention is adequate for a given policy issue will depend on the circumstance and the environment issue. And then take for example, also COVID-19 tracing application also. And I pick up the one of the example, installation of the surveillance camera. Installation of surveillance camera to the maintenance of the public order. Of course, I don't say the name or I don't say the name of the specific country here. But in a country where the domestic political system is widespread, installing the surveillance camera will receive strong public opposition. And then on the other hand, in countries that not democratic countries or the democratic system is underdeveloped, it is imagined that the proportion of people who accept passively the intervention of the state of installing surveillance camera will increase. Yeah, that is why. Moreover, it is considered that the element of the independence of the peoples also has a strong influence. Taking the protection policy for children who use the internet, which is one of my research theme, as you know. In Japan, the Internet Use Protection Act obligates mobile phone companies to set filtering for the minors' mobile phones. Japan is one of the developed countries in which the democracy is widespread. But Japan is the only country that requires personally minors' mobile phone to have filtering setting. In developed country in Europe and United States, although not regulated by national law, there are parents who set filtering based on the awareness of protecting children themselves. That is why it can be seen from this case. Japan people tend to want to be protected by the country, but in Western countries there is a tendency to protect themselves. And then, in conclusion, policy intervention on technology may differ in each country's context, and it may be important to balance intervention setting strengths in each country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I want to connect a couple of things there. One is what Bruce had referred to before about data, and about data being it's always going to be weighted in some way. You know, where did you get the data? How clean is the data, etc. I mean, that's one of the big problems that we work with. But from what I understand, and I'm going to go to Ryuji here, for AI, the way in which AI works, and I'm certainly not an expert, is it essentially sifts through enormous amounts of data and therefore how good or bad the data is particularly important in how artificial intelligence is able to sort of navigate and learn. Is that correct? And if so, how do we ensure or work towards creating responsibility in AI? Because I think that's one of the biggest questions that and the biggest things, and you referenced this in your original 5 minutes there, that robots we're scared of them becoming the masters. We're scared of them sort of because they're going to take all this data, they're going to learn, and then they're going to turn around and become the masters. So can you respond to that in terms of AI and what you think the limits of AI are?
Well, I think it's very important to pay attention to the data set for training for the machine. For example, if only one side party people give certain data for training, then machine can learn only from them, and then they may be against other parties or the public in general. And there are plenty of examples that already happened in the world, and such system has been stopped already. And so that's one thing we need to consider deeply. Also, that is a matter of bias due to a given data. And also, as a second point, we need to think about transparency of the program and data. When we create some artificial intelligence, although I'm not an expert of AI itself, but as far as, well, based on my experience with robotic media and the development of it, we need to see how it's built and created. But today it's still quite difficult to see how such program of AI has been created based on certain techniques. So transparency is the second topic we need to investigate and to consider furthermore.
Okay, so this then connects with one of the points that we wanted to pick up on responsible design, and that's how can we design digital spaces where owners retain control over access to their data. And I think what's interesting is from the work of Kai-Fung Lee, I think it is, on AI. He's talked about two sort of separate developments of AI centers, one around the American sort of model, and then the other sort of within China, and both working with very different data sets. based on what's allowed, and of course what is allowed in one context is very different from what's allowed in the other. Bruce, do you want to pick up on what is responsible design, and how can we design responsibly?
Well, that depends on your intentions in life and what you wish to achieve. You know, there are many definitions of responsible design, some of which are economically or environmentally charged. You know, a definition for responsible design would be doing good for others and for society at large, and to do it with honesty and so on. But, you know, as I've said earlier, the world is full of many people with many intentions, and the capitalist system of production has a set of intentions about maintaining financial solvency that are important to them. So I think design is responsible, has to be responsible, but it's a mixed bag. Can I just answer one other question that has been in my mind since hearing other people talking, which is not directly related to this, but it's about being responsible. I'm interested in social organization and the role of design and technology in having a healthy society that is responsible. And if you can imagine the antique systems of democracy, the Greek agora, where every citizen walked into the marketplace, everybody had a vote, and there was a vote on what to do. We have a Greek agora now, but it's worldwide and it's mediated through laptops, personal computers, and through mobile phones. The trouble is, it's become unmanageable. And the struggle is, how do you get a consensus that really leads to a responsible result that we can all implement? And we know now that these systems of voting can lead to aberrations or quite perverse outcomes. And I think there's a number of dichotomies we're trying to solve here. One is, I've already mentioned, is between the individual and society. Where's the balance? And somebody's put a question up here about society becoming more tribal. I think it's always been tribal. It's becoming more tribal. It's becoming less tribal. It's becoming cellular. It's about individuals and bubbles. But going back to the firewall in China and following this through, I think the other big distinction in a society is whether you agree to have a healthy opposition. And my view is, if you're in a democracy, there has to be opposition. But what you don't do is drive the opposition out of the system. You allow it to exist and you manage the balance of the debate. And of course, on the internet, that's very difficult when opposition arises in a political and social sense. And here I think one of the kind of key issues for me is the other dichotomy between freedom of speech and censorship. And they're both important. Freedom of speech is about allowing everybody, including the opposition, to have their say before a decision is taken. Censorship is about stopping people doing things that cause harm to other people, which are not responsible. And you need both these things. But the trouble is, in the internet landscape and in some political regimes, censorship is used to silence the opposition, which is not the purpose. And I think that's a very difficult social dynamic at the moment.
But that brings into the conversation the social networks being particularly vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation. So
yeah,
one of the things there, and I suppose we could go here to Nagayuki, because Line is a big social network sort of system, and this is partly within your wheelhouse. But what do you think is the designer's role in maintaining the integrity of the system, or can the designer maintain the integrity of the system, or once designed, does this is this in a way it's you leave it and then that's up to the people, or do you come in and you tinker?
Yes, such a problems. Result A is we have two approaches. We have two approaches. One approach is a technical approach on the system side, provider for the standpoint of providers services. And the second point is cultivating literacy on the children side, user side. And then, technical, first, as a technical approach on the system side, for example, as you know, SNS operators operate a mechanism, when occurs a case negative post, such a situation occurs case the resync alter when a user posted harmful contents. And then, in addition, many SNS operators, so many companies delete the inappropriate post follow to the each country's regulation when illegal or harmful information such as Fox. Yeah. And then, but such a automatic deletion system is not perfect. And then, so some posts miss the deletion process. And then it is necessary to improve the internet literacy for users, which another, this is one of the important way. Yeah, and then not only Line Corporation, but also so many internet providers and social media service providers providing the enlightenment in education for the customer, for the children. It is quite an important activity for the companies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nagayuki. I'm going to pick up on one of the things and also relate that back to what Bruce was saying. Is that there's an ongoing thing at the moment. I've managed to come an hour into this presentation without mentioning President Trump, but I'm going to break that and do that. But there's, I thought it was quite interesting. There was a bit of a scandal a few weeks ago relating to the way in which the President of the United States is called to account by the sort of the press corps. And it did remind me of a sort of a class sort of full of like just full of children, really, where there's no discipline or order. And it's interesting because there seems to be complete contempt on both sides, the one for the other. So the president has complete contempt for the press corps, comprised of the mainly traditional press, who would usually have that sort of that enormous power. But the press corps itself seems to have lost any sense of respect for the president and the office of the president. And so it's a complete breakdown. And then I thought it's interesting because the president then uses the direct route or the more direct route of Twitter to speak to his fans, his followers, through this social media service. And there was a call in the more traditional New York Times for the president of Twitter and the people who are controlling Twitter to be able to edit and control what was said by the president. And however much you dislike the president, he is an elected official, and it suggested that the corporation should be in some way editing or what the president says based on what it decides its criteria are. Which I thought was quite an interesting thing, because it brings up these questions of propaganda, censorship, and control. So in the Chinese sense, you would have, or more authoritarian states, you'd have a state-run or state organs, the more traditional press, newspaper, etc., and it would be controlled at that level. In the United States, and in different areas where the social networking services and social media services are a lot more to the fore, there seems to be a bypassing of the traditional media outlets who would traditionally be calling to account and holding to account those in power. Bruce, do you want to speak to that at all?
Oh, that's a complicated question, Joe. Yeah, I mean, it's a good statement, and it's true. But it brings me back to my original point that we're in a polarized society, and media, the new technologies have pushed views. And the question is how you retain order in this. I mean, I think the thing that's tricky with all of this, I mean, the difficulty is we all want to start by believing people when they say things. But we all know that if you allow that to happen too long, particularly after the fascist regime, you end up with something you can't then manage. So there comes a point at which you suspend belief. And that's a public issue, and which seems to be what the press is doing. They're suspending belief. And it's interesting, you know, Donald Trump's much vaunted attack on the media as fake news and the use of the term fake news. I think personally, when people say things like that are critical of other things, they're often describing what they know best, which is they're describing themselves. Mm-hmm. And you can't make that accusation without understanding what the accusation contains. And I think the difficulty with all of this is the levels of public trust that are now being engendered, which are very low. Who do you believe? Do you believe the press? Do you believe Donald Trump? And of course, this is to somebody's advantage, because in the middle, there's a mess. There's a big empty hole where somebody has to step in and help us make decisions. And this is where all the other people start to change our views, moderate our perceptions of the landscape, and try to make capital out of it in one way or another. And this is the attention economy. This is where our attention is grabbed and monetized.
That's a really interesting point, I think. And the attention economy then, that, you know, and you're positing of it as such a scarce commodity, that it's being sold to the highest bidder. That is, our attention is such a scarce commodity, it's being sold to the highest bidder. Yeah. I wanted to just loop back to artificial intelligence and the link to decision making and autonomous decision making. And one of the things I thought was would be interesting to mention are drones. And drones are originally a military technology, and we've seen them sort of wreak havoc in different countries, as there's been no technology policy to really regulate their use. And they've also been sort of used as sort of to deliver things for Amazon. They've been used as sort of just playthings, and then I was reading just yesterday in the New York Times that there are drones now being used as vigilante drones, and they're surveying, and they're making sure people stay at home, and that they observe these lockdowns. And I was wondering if through such technology as drones, we can see where AI might be used to curtail freedoms without that sort of human last barrier. And let me explain that a bit more. In authoritarian regimes or in dictatorial regimes, one of the things that we sort of look to is that you'd expect and hope at some points that humans collectively would form an opposition. Whereas if you have, you know, like in the science fiction dystopic futures, you have scores of robots who come and sort of do the bidding of sort of dark masters. So what I'd like to Ryuji, maybe to the ethicist, to take up the example of drones.
Well, after hearing it, we may imagine an example of a Terminator, the tomorrow, and then we may feel certain threat. And I believe we need to prepare for such world or threat, but I think it's still too advanced to worry too much about it. But at the same time, we need to think about how to make use of it and what the risk of it. And with respect to, in relation to our human rights, for example, such as freedom, when we don't have such method or means to observe other people or to be seen or heard by anybody. For example, when come across the border in going to other countries, as I talked with Joe before, we could be invisible. And then we may lose our identity in such a situation. It's one of the risks. We need to think both sides, as Bruce mentioned, of the technology. Once technology is accepted authentically, it could be used as bad, at the same time good. So, of course, we need to prepare for such bad scenario, but at the same time, for now, I think it's too advanced to worry so much about such a desperate world. But for now, I'm not optimist, but we still need to consider how to make use of by, how to say, developing such technology in a certain way that we can take initiative.
Okay, so that's actually a very interesting point, and I think it links into how the design, the technology is not necessarily good or bad, or we can't judge it necessarily for being good or bad. It's sort of like it's there. It's like a Mount Everest thing. It's not a brownfield. It's like we can't decide whether or not we should have it. It's just there. We have to work with it. So it becomes about literacy or education for both ourselves in engaging with the technology, and in an AI sense in educating the technology, if that's the right verb to use, in getting the technology to do the right thing of sorts. Okay, I'm going to, because we've got about 15 minutes left, I'm going to go to some questions here, which are in the chat box. One of them's been picked up. Okay, Bruce Brown mentions the Greek agora and how the modern version of the agora has become unmanageable. Often there is this inherent assumption that technology solves issues, but it is often done quite the opposite, like the modern agora. Can this not be said of any technology that attempts to harness democracy? How can responsible design in concrete terms avoid this inherent assumption that technology is the end-all solution to large social problems? That's from Anoma van der Veer, and it's Bruce, there's a couple of questions there.
Yeah, I agree with the main point. Technology is not the answer to all our problems. It depends on how it's used. It's neither good nor bad. However, technology does open up new vistas. It allows us to behave and interact in ways we might not have done before. So it does influence behavior, and it changes behavior. So although it's not an answer, it's an agent, and it's a very powerful agent. And one of the things I'd just like to go back on, I'm not an expert in artificial intelligence, but I think you mentioned earlier that the fear of robots taking over the world. My view is that will never happen for one reason. In terms of human behavior, there are two things at work. One is memory and the other is imagination. Now, artificial intelligence can store memories in data form, binary form, or whatever way, and we all carry our memories. But what we have is the power of imagination. That is to put those memories together in new ways that create new scenarios and new futures. Now, I don't know anything else that can do that for us. And I think the difficulty with technology and being responsible is that human beings will invent technologies for no other reason than they've imagined them. They want to see if they can produce what they have imagined. And this is a relentless march. And human beings will always be the same. They'll imagine something new. Then they'll want to know if they can achieve it. Can you transmit sound? Can you transmit images? Can you create 3D environments, and so on? And this is the power of imagination. And I think we all have imaginations, and we have to be careful how they're used and how they're shaped and they're molded by technologies, because we only see the world. The world is not a fixed thing. We only see the world through our memories and imaginations and the way we've been encouraged to shape those memories and imaginations. And if I can just answer one of the other questions, I don't want to go on too long. If I can answer one of the other questions about design education. I think there is needed to be a major reform in design education, a big one. And it's the difference between a 20th century model of design and a 21st century model. The 20th century model of design was product design and service design. What they're both about, though, is managing people as if they were objects. So product design was about giving us tools, giving us things that helped us to extend our human capacity and human biology. Service design was making us feel better in a situation like healthcare, and it managed our experience of going through that system. There's something new in the 21st century called experience design. And it's not any of these things. It's about how we as individuals experience the world and understand it. And the big challenge of design is understanding that human and biological interaction between memory and imagination that helps us form the experiences of the world and the way we interpret it and the way we then act. And our actions are then built up into some kind of collective democracy. So I think there are big challenges in front of them. And I have to say, I don't think they're all problems. I think there's tremendous opportunities. There's threats and there's dangers. There always will be. But there's tremendous threats and opportunities opened up by the new vistas of technology. But technology is not an answer to the problems. It just opens up new vistas.
Okay, I just wanted to add to that the original Greek agora was, and it connects with the point earlier of anonymity, and that was the very opposite. It was it's a sort of decisions made in front of your neighbors, in front of those people who those decisions are going to affect, speaking out, having opinions, but having to defend those opinions within this sort of arena, as opposed to being able to give an opinion hidden behind, some anonymous username in some anonymous forum. And I'd also like to pick up then a question here that relates to the previous panel from Professor Saito on the difference between Western European countries and East Asian countries in response to the COVID pandemic, and your point in the relationship between individual and the coherence of the community, and wondering if the conception of community itself may need to be revisited or redesigned rather than individual freedom. That's quite a philosophical question there.
Well, as I said, I think this is a dynamic between opposing extremes, between the individual and between community. I think there is a tendency toward individualism and tribalism, and it's very hard to retain senses of community. And as I said earlier, people like Donald Trump particularly will create barbarians and enemies in order to create coherence within the community. And that community is very powerful. So I do believe that what this person has asked is very true. As well as securing individual freedoms, we need to redesign and re-understand what it means to be in a coherent community in which we give up some of our freedoms in order for the protection and the benefits that being in that community gives back to us.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question here from Grant Black. I'll take this one. Is Twitter a platform or a publisher? And my response is both. What do you think?
Well, my answer would be, is the question, is it a publisher or should it be a publisher? I think at the moment it is a platform legally. That's what's enshrined in the legislation in the States. And that's what a lot of these companies are hiding behind. What it should be, I think it should have a responsible attitude to freedom of speech and censorship. And this is a judgment call. And if something is published that causes harm to other people or misleads them, then I think the people who publish it should make the judgment call, personally. But at the moment, it's a platform legally.
So this links back to the deontological sort of questions of rights and responsibilities as relates to what you're doing versus what you claim you're doing. And I think there's an interesting thing, and this relates to sort of IAFOR, because we're both a platform and a publisher. And I think it's very important that whatever you decide to do and whatever you decide to raise, you shouldn't be able to step back and go, I don't know, it's not my problem. I've got nothing to do with it, if you're part of the thing itself. And Nagayuki, do you have anything to say on that? And then we'll go to Ryuji, based on the Twitter. Is it a platform or a publisher, and what rights and responsibilities should these new platforms have? And I assume you'd be able to talk from the perspective of the Line Corporation on that as well.
Yeah, Twitter also SNS services, and Line also SNS service provider. And then standpoint of service provider, SNS is as you know, Bruce mentioned, platform. SNS is a platform. But yeah, of course, SNS have a responsibility as a platform. But content generated by customer generated. That is why. I think harmful contents need more illegal and harmful contents have to take down, erase, delete is important. It is important thing, but follow to the each country's regulation is also important. And then one of the solution way is improving users' internet literacy, is providing the education, literacy education is an important thing.
Okay, thank you, Nagayuki. Ryuji, do you have anything to say on that?
We've been talking about communities, I believe, as described by Bruce.
So there's a point here, in actual fact, that's on that. It says sentience is what robots need to be called, to be even close to being called artificial intelligence.
It's related to it.
So I'm talking in terms of rights and responsibilities.
Yeah, it's polarized, and but still, what to say? From my point of view, what I wanted to say with respect to communities, what's going on with online community, or what Bruce think of when he mentions a community. As we know, historically, face-to-face community has been deteriorated. It's decreasing. The power of the community has been decreasing. But on the other hand, online, we have so many kinds of communities, and it provides our identities, not just one, but multiple. But it seems at a glance there are diversity. However, when we look into more the detail at the data itself, it seems we give opinions, but our communities are quite separated. In a certain group, we provide so much opinion, but only with colleagues who they can share same opinion. In such a sense, in other words, we are in bubbles in which we can share same opinions only. So the point is we are missing dialogue. And in addition, what I wanted to say or mention is we might be losing our sensitivity to the others.
Okay, yes, so a couple of very important points. And Bruce, yes, I'll give you the closing words.
No, I wanted to reply to the specific point that's just been made, which I entirely agree with. I mean, the danger here is we end up with artificial intelligence, an echo chamber.
Yeah.
That is, the artificial intelligence gives us information it thinks we want to have. So what we end up doing is becoming associated with people who think the same way as us, rather than people who think differently.
Right.
And we end up in this smaller and smaller circle, this echo chamber, which leads to extremism and polarization. So I think that's the danger of artificial intelligence for me. What we need to do is start looking outwards to engage with people who feel differently, think differently, and have different worldviews, and to take them on board and to live with them and work with them.
Well, Bruce, that's a fantastic way of connecting with the conference theme of embracing difference, and I also think a fantastic way of ending this particular panel, where we've had different people from 3 different backgrounds who have talked about the intersection of design and democracy. And I think, as always, it's in those spaces in between that we're able to learn from each other, and whether that be differences of culture or discipline, experience, background, whatever that might be, that's where we get the most interesting sort of sense of growth on an educational and on a personal level. So I think it's a wonderful way of ending this day, which is a way of teeing up the conference. And I hope you've enjoyed this particular panel. I'd like to thank my panelists, Bruce Brown, Nagayuki Saito, and Ryuji Yamazaki-Skov, for taking part in this discussion. We'd really like to thank again the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation for supporting this event, and we hope that we're able to do similar things in the future. And again, in the fulfilling of our mission of promoting international exchange, facilitating cultural awareness, and encouraging interdisciplinary discussion, and then sharing that with the world. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Nagayuki. Thank you, Ryuji. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow online. Thank you very much.